Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're taking a look at one of the larger inverter generators available on the market. This one, it is made by Erayak. They sent it to me to do the unboxing, check out the features, and of course, put it to the test. So let's get it out of the box and see what we've got. First impression, this is a very nice looking machine. There is a lot of metal, some nice big beefy hinges, metal frame, and just overall a condition and the look of this machine looks to be fantastic. So we'll cover the features in a minute. I want to get this a little bit more mobile. It did come with a wheel kit, so I think we should get that installed first, and then we'll go into detail on what this thing can do. Also included in the wheel kit box is this accessory pack right here. We have a charging cable for a 12-volt battery and a few different types of plugs to make your own cords. And we also have a toolkit, which includes pretty much everything you're going to need on this machine, including all the wrench sizes needed to install that wheel kit, spark plug tool, and a screwdriver that is reversible depending upon what bit you need. So I decided just to use my car jack to lift this up. If you don't have something like this, you could use, maybe a block of wood or even tip it on its side. There is no oil in the engine yet, so tipping it isn't really going to cause an issue. Anyway, let's get the feet installed on this side and then we'll do the wheels on the other. And I did leave the other side loose. So once we get all 4 bolts in, we'll tighten them up, add the wheels, and the wheel kit will be done. It's nice. These wheels actually come with ball bearings. You'd be surprised, a lot of generators don't. And not that you're rolling them that far, but it does make it a lot easier to roll around with something like that. So now that it's out of the box, we can get our first good look at this machine. Starting on the right side here, we do have a starter recoil, which normally you don't need to use. This is an electric start machine. We have access to add and check oil. Of course, we have the fuel tank with a gauge, and around front here, that is where the control panel is. So we'll go over that in more detail in a minute. We also have access to the air filter, and this panel here is removable. So that will give you access to the engine and also the battery. So on first look at the control panel, I really like how they laid this out. They've separated it so that the output is on the right and the engine controls and status lights are on the left. So let's start over here on the engine control side of things. We have a total of 4 status lights. Now, normally the only light you should see is the light here in the center, which indicates the inverter is online and making power. But if the engine should suddenly shut down, you definitely want to look over here because this might give you a clue as to what's going on. There's 2 reasons why it would shut down. The first one would be low oil, which is the light on the right. And we also have a light here for carbon monoxide. So if either of those conditions happen, the engine shuts down, both to protect itself as well as you. We also have a light here on the left, which is the overload light. So, this machine, it is rated at 6,800 watts, but if you should exceed that, the inverter will kill the power to protect itself, and this light will light up. Now, a nice feature that this has, and many don't, is a reset button. So to get the power back, you would just take the load off that caused the issue and hit the reset button. A lot of other models, you actually have to shut the engine down and restart it. So definitely a welcomed feature. This is electric start. The battery's not connected now, so we'll get back to that in a second. But you would just push the button to start it, push the button to stop it. And of course, before you do that, you have to turn the fuel on. And it is recommended that you have the eco switch off like it is now for starting at least a cold engine, because that's going to help start the engine. It's going to help build some heat in the engine and help the engine run stable faster. And once it is stable, you can turn that on. That's going to slow the engine down. It's going to make it run more quiet. And it's also going to save on fuel. So normally you do want to keep that in the on position. The only time you should turn it off is when you're starting it, or if you're putting on a really heavy, really sudden load. It needs that extra engine speed to help absorb the load. And lastly, we have this red button right here, which says pairing. So that would suggest that this is Bluetooth capable. The manual does not talk about it, and I did not see an app in the App Store. So potentially that is a feature they're going to come out with in the future. And over here on the power output side of things, there are actually 2 things I really like seeing on this model. As odd as it sounds, not all inverters have circuit breakers. They actually rely on the inverter to shut things down when they detect a problem. And many machines also don't have weather protection like this. So that is a great feature to see. And like this, each output, it is protected with the appropriate breaker. So here we just have some standard 20 amp, 120 volt outputs. Here is a higher powered 120 volt output. And we also have a 240. We have some USB charging ports. Top one is 1 amp, bottom one is 2.1. And we also have a plug rated at 8.3 amps, 12 volts, for charging a 12 volt battery. Yeah, before we go any further, let's get some oil in the engine. Small engines typically ship without oil because a lot of times shippers put the machine sideways, and if there was oil in there, it would all leak out and cause a mess. So the cover recommends just over a liter of 15W30, and the manual actually calls for 15W40. Now, the type of oil you use really depends on the expected outside temperature. If you live somewhere where it's really cold, 5W30 might be better. In my case, 10W30 is what I normally use. But if you're somewhere really warm, 15W40 or maybe even straight 30. And in my case, I am just going to use 30 weight oil for the break-in. Now, if you ask 100 people how to break in an engine properly, you're probably going to get 100 different answers. The important thing is change the oil after maybe 5 hours of break-in time. The manual actually says 20 hours, but the thing to remember is that these small engines, they don't have oil filters, and any material that breaks off during break-in, you want to get out of there as soon as possible. So, even doing a second oil change at the 20-hour mark is a good idea. And then after that, every 50 hours should be fine. And it's probably hard to see, but the oil, it is filled right up to the last thread. And you can use the dipstick just to verify that. And yeah, we are pretty much as full as we can get. So now that we've got oil in the machine, it is safe to remove this panel and connect up that battery. So actually, the battery I thought was in the bottom right corner and could be accessed from here. And although technically it is in the corner, to gain access to it, we need to pull this cover right here. So we will do that in a second. Either way, though, I did want to pull this cover to have a better look at what was inside. And now that the cover is off, I'm really liking what I'm seeing here. This is a fairly standard engine. 420 cc's, found on a lot of different equipment. Parts are fairly easy to source. And this engine can confidently power its rated load of 6,800 watts. Under the head, we have what looks like maybe a temperature sensor. And below it, we have the air box. So this is where you would check or change the filter. To the right side of the carburetor, we have this sound chamber, which just helps quiet the machine. And of course, we have the carburetor itself, so it looks fairly serviceable if you should need to clean it. And if you want to drain the bowl manually, there is a screw right there you can open up, and every bit of fuel in that bowl will drain out through this line to the bottom of the machine. I'm also noticing too that the choke is servo controlled, which is a good thing because this machine also has a remote control. And you'd be surprised how many generators come with a remote start option, but there's no automatic choke. And without that, you're not going to get the machine started. This machine, though, shouldn't be an issue. And I'm almost willing to bet the pairing button may not be for Bluetooth. It might actually be to pair with a remote control. And we got a pretty small battery. That is a lithium-ion battery, very lightweight. And it's going to last quite a bit longer than a lead-acid battery. And we just have these quick connects right here to connect the battery into the machine. Like that. So let's give this thing a try. I've plugged in a light, turned it on. We've also got the kilowatts, so we'll do a quick read on the voltage and the hertz. Later we will actually use the oscilloscope and the THD meter to measure how clean the power output is. So I am going to turn the fuel valve on, and you can see now the start button is blinking. So I'm going to stand back, try the remote, and go for the first start. I am pretty impressed with this machine. I've started many hundreds, if not thousands, of generators, and none have been as easy to start as this one was. I also liked the way the inverter powered up. Had a soft start, so the voltage kind of ramped up slowly. You could see that in the light. And the noise level, very low. Definitely on par with what you'd expect with something like this. So we'll measure the exact level with a decibel meter in a bit, as well as check the power quality and put this under load to see how much it can take. But before I do that, I do want to get this outside, run it for a couple hours, do the first oil change, and then we'll put it to the test. Yeah, it's pretty late in the day. I've only got a couple hours of sunlight left at best. So I'm just going to get this started. I'm going to put a light 1500 watt load on for most of that time, but toward the end, I'm going to double it to 3000 watts, and then we'll bring it in for the first oil change. So like last time, no issues at all getting this machine started. And there's actually a couple indicators I missed the first time before we had this machine running. So we do have some additional information here. This is indicating 60 hertz. We also have total runtime on the engine. So right now it's 0.0 hours and 243 volts. We also have a load indicator right here, which I believe is going to be a total of 5, maybe 6 lights, and we have 2 lit up, which seems about right given that we're pulling a 1500 watt load, which is about 20% of the overall capacity of this machine. So we're starting with, I would say, about half a tank of fuel. So let's give this some time and check back. All right, so we've just passed the 1 hour mark, and so far, so good. So we'll give it a little bit more time, then we'll increase the load, and assuming everything goes well, then we'll bring it in and change the oil. All right, so we've been running now for about an hour and a half. So I'm going to up the ante, actually 1.6 hours. And we're going to plug in another space heater. We'll turn that on in a second. And we are losing the sun pretty quick. So I'm going to turn on an external light powered by the generator. So let's double the load to 3,000 watts. Well, I let it run a little bit longer than I thought I was gonna. At this point, the sun is almost completely down, and I'd say we're definitely over the 2-hour mark. So let's give this a second, see where we're at. Still at exactly 60 hertz, and we're at 2.6 hours. So I think that is plenty. Let's take the load off, and we'll let it run for a couple minutes so the engine can cool down, and then we'll shut it down. So I would say one of the nicer features is the remote. So right now I am about 70 feet away, and I'm sure the remote is going to have no problem shutting this machine down. Pretty impressive. All right, so let's see what the break-in oil looks like. It is pretty normal to have a little bit of metallic in there, but willing to bet this one looks pretty good. For break-in oil, this looks really good. I've broken in plenty of engines, and I wish they all looked like that. So I'm going to get the oil refilled, and in the morning, we'll bring this outside and put it to the test. And for the record, after about 2.5 hours running, we do still have, I'd say, a good gallon of fuel left, and we only started with 2. So the capacity of the tank, it is a 5-gallon tank, actually just a bit above. And how long it'll last, it really depends on how heavy the load is on the machine. All right, so before we go outside, I want to explain what this meter is going to measure. Right now I have it set to measure THD, which stands for total harmonic distortion. Harmonics are in multiples of the main frequency, so the main output on the generator is 60 hertz, and ideally 100% of the output would be 60 hertz. But that is not the case. There are always some harmonics, some other frequencies, at 120, 180, 240 hertz, etc. And traditional generators can produce harmonics kind of in the 25% range, which is pretty bad. Anything over 5% can damage electronics. Just for reference, I'm going to measure my utility power. And my utility, it's delivering at 2.4%. So that is well below the 5% criteria. And for reference, I'm going to put up a video clip of me testing a traditional generator under load. And those typically top out in the low to mid-20s. All right, so let's put this thing to the test. The plan is just to get the engine started, and while the engine's warming up, we'll double check the outputs. We use the kilowatt to measure the voltage and the frequency, the amp probe to measure the total harmonic distortion, and the oscilloscope so we can see what the output looks like. Once things have warmed up, we will put on approximately a half load of 3,000 watts, and then we're going to bring it up to the max. Now, this load bank, it can only go in 500 watt increments, so we can bring the load up to 6,500 watts. And once you factor in the 100 watt light and the 200 watts the cooling fans use, we're going to be right up against the max rated of this machine of 6,800 watts. And just for reference, with the machine turned off, the sound level, we're starting at 45 decibels. So we'll turn the eco throttle on. No issues getting the machine started. Without a load, we are starting pretty low at 0.5%. So that is excellent. And the sine wave looks pretty much perfect. So I'm going to give it a few minutes to fully warm up, and then we'll start with a 3,000 watt load. With the eco switch turned on and no load, we are starting at about 59 decibels. All right, so the machine has had plenty of time to warm up, so let's bring up the load to 3,000 watts, starting with 2,000 watts. Engine handled that sudden load without an issue. Now we're at 3,000 watts. Hertz are rock solid steady. THD remains pretty low at 1.6%, and the sine wave looks pretty much near perfect. So we'll let this run for a good few minutes, and then we'll try for the max of 6,800 watts. And at a 3,000 watt load, the sound level did not come up very much. We are at 62 decibels. All right, it's been a few minutes, no issues at all pulling 3,000 watts. So let's bring the load up to 4,000 watts. The engine speed increased. Got a little bit louder, which is expected. Let's try for 5,000 watts. No issues. How about 6,000? It's doing it. How about 6,500? Yeah, no issues. Once you factor in everything else, we're pretty much at the max. Let's see if there's any warnings of an overload. No, there is no visual indication, but it does indicate we are at 100% load. So let's see where the THD is at. Pretty good, actually 1.4%. So lower than what my utility provides. And the sine wave looks pretty good. So we'll give this a few minutes and potentially bump it up a little more. And now we're at full load, and it's still pretty quiet at about 70 decibels. So no issues at all pulling its max rated load. So I think I'm not going to push my luck. You know, this machine is rated at 6,800 watts, and that's for a reason. You know, the inverter can't do more than that, and it will shut down. And the load bank, it does need the cooling fans, which are powered from the generator. So I am going to take the load fully off, and we'll give it a few minutes for both the load bank and the engine to cool down. All right, guys, and that is pretty much it. This Erayak R8000iE inverter performed flawlessly. It handled everything I threw at it. So if you want to find out more on this model, I will leave information down in the video description. And I also wanted to thank Erayak for sending this one to us to try out. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.